Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Earn It Podcast, making it to and through nursing school. I am your host. Today is Tuesday, March 18th, and on today's episode, how the heck do you use your textbooks to your advantage? All right, so first things first, we're going to go over why it's important, and then we're going to go over how exactly you use this, and more importantly, when you use it, because the how is basically the when to a certain extent, right? So let's kick it off real quick. Why the heck do we even need to use our textbooks, right? We have PowerPoints, we have lectures, we have handouts, we have assignments, we have all this other stuff that's supposed to teach us what we need to know. So why exactly do we need the textbooks, right? So without these, what you basically get from any old lecture are definitions, lists of different items like side effects, interventions, steps to a procedure, things that you need to do if X, Y, or Z is happening. Various different adverse reactions, contraindications. Um, Other than steps to a procedure, any old algorithm, right? Anything that informs you what you need to do, what action you need to take based on a specific symptom, situation, or circumstance. And the problem with all of this is that a lot of this seems random when you first start to look at it and study it. If you just go to lecture and you make some flashcards and you brute force memorize it, you can definitely brute force memorize it, but you're going to run into issues with the critical thinking questions that are required of you throughout nursing school and beyond. A book allows you to understand the rationale behind it, so all those lists aren't hard to memorize. And more importantly, and this is where um, you can feel like you have more of a superpower almost. You can recall things during a test without memorizing, right? So if you forget something on a test, you can reason through it if you properly use the textbooks. Okay, so there's a couple of other tricks to it, to what to do when you forget something on a test. That'll be a whole other episode that I can do. But what's really important is that we use the book to our advantage. So there are two ways of doing this. So this is kind of the how/when. There are two different ways that we can do this. Um, Now, with other classes, I have done what I'm about to say, and it's worked out just fine. However, this doesn't really work that great in nursing school unless you're just like a genius of some kind, which I am not. The first way to do things is to use the book only and to not bother at all with PowerPoints. Don't bother showing up to class and listening to lectures. Um, your life will be a lot harder this way. Okay. You will have so much more information to sort through that you probably will not get to it all in the amount of time that you have. Is this technically possible? It is technically possible. Whenever you go further and if you get into nurse practitioner school, the majority of NP schools are, completely online, but you're literally learning how to treat patients, manage care, prescribe medications, right? So how are we able to do that all online? But then for nursing school, we are going in person and we have all this other stuff that we're doing, right? Um, the fact of it is, it's two different things. So for now, this again is not really going to work out great for you. If your grades allow, I guess you could try it out for a week and see how things go. But what I'm telling you is, especially on those weeks where it's 1 week and for one class you get 4 or 5 different chapters. Sometimes instructors and the way certain courses work is that they will only extract a certain amount of things out of, like, they might take random portions out of 4 or 5 or 6 chapters to put it into one kind of thing that summarizes everything that you need to know. So that's kind of why it's not really recommended to do that, because you're just going to do information overload and you're going to miss a lot of stuff while being overloaded with information. Okay? Another way is what I would say, that before you start really getting down into it, you're going to take the chapters and you're going to quickly skim through it. And this is just going to be like a primer for your brain to start absorbing the information that you need to from the PowerPoints and from lecture. You need to make sure this is done before you show up for lecture, before you look at a PowerPoint, or maybe right after you look at a PowerPoint. This is just to get your brain kind of stretched a little bit. This is kind of a brain warm up. You're not supposed to take in too much of this information, but it kind of gets your brain primed and expecting different bits of information, right? Um, it's kind of like a mental preparation. This should be done before you start studying. Other than that, you should not look at the book for a while. What I mean by a while is, let's take a week. Let's say you have the lecture on Monday, Sunday before class, or Monday morning, or whatever it is before class, Tuesday, whenever your class week starts, you're going to look and do the skimming and look at the PowerPoints, all that good stuff, right? Now, then you're going to show up to class, you're going to ask questions, you're going to make your own little notes, and then you're going to make your flashcards, and then you're going to study those flashcards. And when you get it pretty well, again, this should only take 2 to 3 days max. When you start to know this stuff well enough, you're going to get to a point where you kind of know the gist of what has been discussed, but those long lists of things you're not going to necessarily know yet. The reason why is that the brute memorization of like, oh, factors that affect X, Y, or Z. Those are sometimes a list of like 14, 15, 16 different things, right? So how are you supposed to seriously memorize that? And then, 100 other things that week. And then multiple weeks before your exam. And then multiple exams before a semester. And then multiple semesters before NCLEX, right? How are you supposed to do that? Well, the secret, again, is knowing what you need to know by studying to an extent in which you are very familiar with everything. And then you're going to deep dive in that individual chapter. You're going to do one at a time, and you're going to take one concept at a time, and you're going to deep dive into it, because what your goal is, you're understanding the why or the how. You're developing an understanding for the reasoning, so that you are not simply memorizing things at a certain point. You need to memorize basic vocab and definitions. And once you have that, you can talk the talk, and then you can find out why exactly that is. A lot of you already do this sometimes when you have time for it. Like I myself, there are certain things that I will not get in my brain until I understand why that is. One of them is, there are a lot of acronyms and mnemonics for different things. That's great and all, but it really helps for you to just understand the reasoning. So one example of this that I feel like comes up a lot is cholinergic, anticholinergic side effects, right, for drugs. You could choose to take a mnemonic and memorize this, but here's your problem. You need to reason this out, okay? Because you're not going to necessarily get a situation where you're looking at a question that's asking for side effects, or a select all that apply even for that. You're going to get questions that put you in the position of advising someone for a certain thing, right? You need to be able to put that in multiple different forms. You need to formulate that for different patients and different patient populations and different people that have different kinds of vocabularies. And someone might ask you why. Why is it that I'm going to have, constipation if I have anticholinergic drug or something, right? You need to be able to reason out why that is, not just say it's on a list that I had to memorize, because that's not going to work out. After you have that whole thing down, you're going to get to a point where you're going to find yourself accidentally taking a body systems based and physiological based approach to everything that you learn in nursing school. In other words, the basis for your understanding is going to go from memorization to understanding the physiology of the systems involved, the pathophysiology of the diseases that affect the systems involved, and you're going to be able to, from there, extrapolate all sorts of different things on your own. And again, thus being able to reason through things. Okay. So you should be able to know everything you know about cholinergic drugs and without think with or cholinergic symptoms, whatever, cholinergic disease processes, right? And they should be able from there to extrapolate everything about anticholinergics without ever knowing anticholinergics exist. You should be able to know, and I'm going to go into a whole thing on how to study for pharm, okay, and how to study for certain med surg things. I'm going to go into a whole thing about how to do that properly. But this kind of goes back to it. Without the fundamental understanding, which you generally only get from the book, because otherwise lectures would be 10 hours long if you got the reasoning behind every single nursing intervention for every single disease or every single medication that you're giving, right? Everything has a list of the entire nursing process is involved with everything. And instead of memorizing nursing process for all the medications and for all of this and all of that, you're going to get into a complicated situation where you're going to have a patient with disease A, B, and C, and D, and E, and they're on medications X, Y, H, J, and they have device 9 and 10 implanted, and there is issue 9.4 with device 3, right? Everything's going to be complicated. So you're not going to, that's like 30 different interventions and lists of plant, the whole, if you take that into account, there's like 15 or 20 different things, but then they all change each other based on everything that's involved, right? Again, this is why you need to be able to reason through these things, because if you brute memorize all this stuff, you're not going to be able to perform when you're faced with a real world situation. Okay. That's just the way that cookie's going to crumble there. So again, don't go to the book right away and know what you're going into the book for. You're not going into the book to memorize things that you already should have memorized. That's why I say you need to go ahead and do most of your studying first and then use that for rationale and reasoning. And honestly, if you can't find it there and you can't understand it there, or you get too overwhelmed there, have a little conversation with ChatGPT about it. If your instructor isn't available to talk to you for hours upon hours at a time about all the things that you need to understand the nitty-gritty of, right? To a certain extent, it's your responsibility to make sure that this stuff gets done. Okay. So thanks so much for listening to Earn It Podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please follow so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. And don't have to, spend time searching for it. If you want to come onto the podcast for, Q&A, a chat, whatever, there's a link in the description of this episode. Just fill out a very short form. Again, thanks so much for listening, and go out there and earn it today.